August 10th, 2005, 19,000 feet up the Rupal face of Nanga Parbat, Pakistan. The distinct thumping of a Pakistani Army rescue helicopter cuts through the thin air as Tomaž Humar watches it bank toward his ledge. The Slovenian legend is a shell of himself. He hasn't eaten in 6 days. His radio signal is fading to static. His toes are turning the dark blue of advanced frostbite. But in a few minutes, the cable will drop, plucking him from certain death to be hailed as a national hero. Back home, Slovenia is ready to erupt in champagne and cheers. Just one problem. Surviving this rescue is actually the worst possible outcome. Look closely at the man in the snow. He is already dead. He just hasn't realized it yet. Welcome to the absolute limit of human endurance. You might be asking yourself, how could living through a miracle rescue be a curse? To understand that, you have to rewind 8 years. You need to see the moment that broke him. The moment his relationship with the mountains shifted from passion to a death wish. October 31st, 1997. Humar is tackling the west face of Nuptse, a terrifying 8,000-foot wall of ice in Nepal. Beside him is his best friend, Jagat. They weren't just climbers. These were the golden boys of Slovenian alpinism. And Jagat, he was the one everyone adored. Gifted, seasoned, and known as the guy who always made it home safe. For 5 agonizing days, they clawed their way up that face. The mountain threw everything it had at them. Storms pinned them down for 4 days straight, trapping them in a frozen paralysis. Then their stove leaked. No stove means no melting snow, which means dangerous dehydration. At one point, the snow piled so heavy on their tiny bivouac sack, they were nearly crushed to death in their sleep. And here's the kicker. They were doing all of this unroped. No safety line tethering them together. If one slipped, the other could only watch. It was fast. It was bold. It was suicidally risky. On the third night, Jagat turned to Humar and said something that would haunt him forever. If we pull this off, we'll be happy for the rest of our lives. And if we don't, well, we'll make half of Slovenia happy. It was dark humor, a jab at the critics back home who despised their aggressive style, but it hit a nerve. Plenty of people thought they were pushing their luck too far. Halloween, October 31st, the final dash for the summit, still unroped, still entirely on their own. Jagat pushed ahead, opening a 15-minute lead. The clock hit 1:15 p.m., crackle on the radio. It was Jagat. He had made it, summit attained. 15 minutes later, Humar crested the ridge, but the summit was empty. All he found were footprints that stopped abruptly at the edge, and a radio lying in the snow where it had been dropped. The wind on that ridge screams like a jet engine. Somewhere in that 15-minute silence, a single gust had caught Jagat. It blew him clean off the mountain, sending him thousands of feet down the south face into the void. Gone. Silence. Humar was now alone at 25,400 feet. His partner was dead. Night was falling, and he had to get down. The descent wasn't just a climb, it was a horror movie. His headlamp failed, plunging him into pitch blackness. His goggles vanished into the abyss. Dehydration twisted his mind until he started hallucinating, seeing things that weren't there. Then the mountain tried to finish the job. An avalanche swept him off his feet, and by some miracle, he managed to self-arrest before the drop. It took 48 agonizing hours to fight his way down the mountain. By the time he collapsed into base camp, he was a wreck, ravaged by frostbite, dying of thirst, and haunted by what he'd left behind. Back home in Slovenia, the funeral bells were already ringing for Jagat. He was a legend in the community, loved by everyone. And while nobody denied Humar's survival was miraculous, the mood wasn't celebratory. Fingers started pointing in Humar's direction. The whispers were cruel. The mountain had taken the best climber and spared the wrong one. Humar believed them. He carried that survivor's guilt like a heavy pack. The mental damage cut deeper than the cold ever could. From that moment on, he cut the rope. Solo climbing became his only reality. He simply couldn't stomach the risk of burying another friend. Let's hit pause on the nightmare for a second. If you want to dive deeper into the extreme, grab exclusive uncut footage, and help steer the channel, jump onto our Patreon. Catch you on the inside. Here is the tragic part. Nuptse wasn't the start of his darkness. It wasn't even the first chapter. Rewind to 1969. Humar was born in Slovenia, back when the iron grip of communist Yugoslavia still held tight. He came from blue-collar roots. His father, a bricklayer, looked at climbing and saw a useless, dangerous waste of time. Tomaž didn't have gear money. His first harness was literally a seatbelt ripped out of a junked Fiat. But at 20, his life took a sharp, violent turn. He was drafted into the Yugoslavian military and thrown into Kosovo right as the Balkan powder keg was exploding. The things he witnessed there broke something inside him. He watched his unit brutalize ethnic Albanians, acts of cruelty that violated every moral code he held. When his service time ran out and he tried to leave, the army said no. They locked him up, beat him down, and put him through psychological torture. Then they dumped him at a train station deep in hostile territory, leaving him for dead. He made it back home, but the boy who left was gone. He returned with severe PTSD, and the only medication that worked was vertical rock. You see this a lot, trauma survivors chasing the edge to numb the pain, the adrenaline spike, the hyperfocus needed to not die. It silences the noise in your head for a while. But like any drug, the tolerance builds. You need steeper walls, colder nights. It becomes a full-blown addiction. And Humar was the ultimate junkie. He started chasing suicide lines, routes so dangerous his own clubmates called them death solos. This wasn't a sport to him anymore. It was a survival mechanism. The death zone was the only place he felt truly alive. Fast forward to 1999, and Humar is the alpha climber in Slovenia. He'd already bagged the PLA d'Or, the heavyweight title of the mountaineering world for his work on Amadablam, but he was hunting a bigger monster, the south face of Dhaulagiri. Dhaulagiri is a 26,000-foot beast in Nepal, and that south face is legendary for all the wrong reasons. It is a 13,000-foot vertical coffin with a 40% death rate. Even Reinhold Messner, the god of high-altitude climbing, looked at that wall twice and walked away. They told him it was suicide. Yet, come October 1999, Humar racked up to face the beast alone. 0 partners, 0 safety net. He spent 9 agonizing days clawing his way up that vertical face. At 18,700 feet, disaster struck. A massive boulder slammed into his leg. By some miracle, the bone held, but it was a warning shot. Day 8, 25,600 feet up. The mountain decided to fight back. The wind wasn't just blowing, it was screaming. The cold cut right to the bone. Then the radio crackled to life. Nobody has ever pulled this off. You need to come down now. Delirious, gasping for thin air, Tomaž stared at a crumpled photo of his son, Tomi. Maybe it was the hypoxia, or maybe it was fate, but something shifted. He saw the boy in the photo move, crooking a finger, whispering, "Come home, Daddy." That hallucination became the choice that kept him breathing. He later recalled, "It hit me like lightning, you are going to die. One more step up, and you're a dead man." So he did the hardest thing imaginable. He turned back. No summit, but he was alive. Back home in Slovenia, the crowds didn't care about the summit. They cheered for the man. Even the legendary Reinhold Messner, god of mountaineering, said the peak didn't matter compared to the climb itself. He dubbed it the most significant ascent of the decade. He even called Humar the greatest climber of their generation. He'd gone higher on that wall, completely solo, than anyone believed humanly possible. Overnight, Humar became Slovenia's Athlete of the Year. The president pinned the Golden Order of Freedom on his chest. He was so iconic that you could mail a letter to just Tomaž Humar, Slovenia, and the postman would know exactly where to take it. He had it all. The glory, the medals, the hero status. But in a cruel twist of irony, just 1 year later, in October 2000, his career almost ended forever. He wasn't on a mountain, he was working on his family home. One dark night, he missed a step in an unfinished stairwell and plummeted 10 feet onto cold concrete. He looked down and saw a nightmare. His right leg was twisted backward across his chest. The thigh bone, obliterated. His left heel was smashed to pieces. Doctors told him survival was lucky, but walking was a fantasy. They seriously considered cutting off one, maybe both legs. Finally, they delivered the cold, hard truth. Get used to a wheelchair. You're never leaving it. Climbing wasn't just over. It was a distant memory. But Humar? He looked at their prognosis and laughed. He wouldn't even stay in his hospital bed. He'd break out, wheeling himself through the city streets just to feel free. Through sheer, stubborn mental force, he commanded his body to knit itself back together. After nearly 12 surgeries and torture chamber rehab, he stood up and walked. He didn't waste a second getting back to the high altitude. Fast forward to 2005, and Humar wasn't just climbing, he was dominating the elite circuit again. That summer, he locked on to the ultimate prize, the rupal face of Nanga Parbat, the tallest vertical wall on the planet. You have to understand what he was walking into here. They call Nanga Parbat the Killer Mountain, and that is not just a catchy nickname. Before Hermann Buell finally tamed the beast in 1953, 31 other souls perished trying. 31. Let that number sink in for a second. Back in 1934, a single storm wiped out 10 men, 4 German climbers, and 6 Sherpas. 3 years later, in 1937, an avalanche buried 18 Sherpas and 12 climbers in one massive stroke. Statistically, you are looking at one of the deadliest graveyards in the world. And the rupal face, that is 15,000 feet of sheer vertical nightmare rock, ice, and snow that demands absolute perfection to survive. This is the exact spot where Reinhold Messner watched his own brother die. Messner called it his mountain of destiny. But Humar, he wasn't scared. He was ready. He even packed something you don't usually see on a gear list. He flew in an astrologer named Nuptse all the way from Slovenia to read the mountain's aura and pick the spiritually perfect time to attack. Sounds crazy to us, but for Tomaž, this was non-negotiable. To him, mountains weren't just rocks. They were living things with souls. He truly believed that if his spirit was aligned, the mountain would keep him safe. His apartment looked more like a temple than a climber's. Crash pad crystals everywhere, Buddha statues, the Virgin Mary, pictures of gurus. He would literally dangle a pendulum to check his chakras before gearing up. This was his reality. So on August 1st, 2005, the clouds parted at 3 p.m. Nuptse gave the nod, and Humar began his solo ascent into the void. For the first 48 hours, it was textbook perfection. Then came August 3rd, 21,000 feet up, the script flipped. Humar walked straight into what he called an ice maze. Imagine a labyrinth of overhanging ice where every turn leads to a dead end or a fatal drop. Suddenly, the floor dropped out from under him. No warning, just air. Instinct took over. He jammed his tools in, stopping the fall and carving out a ledge barely big enough for his boots. He spent the next 2.5 hours fighting for inches, but after barely moving 300 feet, he hit a wall. The snow was rotten, unstable. The whole face felt like it was holding its breath, waiting to crumble. He hunkered down in that hole for the night, trying to slow his heart rate and solve an impossible puzzle. He had no idea that icy coffin was about to be his entire world for the next 6 days. August 4th, 6:46 a.m. Static broke the silence at base camp. It was Humar. His voice was tight with fear. Cannot move up, down, or right, only left. Then at 1:38 p.m., the radio crackled again. A rock fall had smashed into him, injuring his arm and neck. He was soaking wet. The pain was constant. He was screaming for help. He even broadcast a mayday signal to the Slovenian embassy, begging for a miracle. And just like that, a solo climb turned into a global emergency. Back home in Slovenia, things started getting weird. Before leaving, his team had set up a live website to track the expedition, and now the whole world was watching. Flashback to 2005. We didn't have live streaming back then, but the concept was revolutionary. Log on, track the climb, feel like you were there. The moment news broke that Humar was pinned down, the internet lost its mind. Base camp transformed into a media hub, pumping out hourly updates, what he ate, battered percentages, rescue sketches, and the servers just couldn't take the heat. They literally had to wire in 7 extra servers just to keep the site from crashing. In a single week, 56 million people tuned in. Entire families in Slovenia sat paralyzed in front of screens, refreshing pages, desperate for news of their countrymen stuck on a rock face halfway around the globe. It got so big that presidents from both nations stepped in. This stopped being a mountain rescue. It became a high-stakes diplomatic tightrope walk. Before long, the Slovenian foreign minister was on a direct line to Islamabad. While Pakistan's military brass strategized with aviation experts, Humar was enduring a living hell. Every 5 minutes, the mountain shook as avalanches roared past him on both flanks. The humidity spiked to 99%, which meant one deadly thing: nothing would dry. Not his gear, not his sleeping bag, not the clothes freezing to his skin. The air hovered between 14 and 19 degrees Fahrenheit, but the wind chill cut right through to the bone. Humar had to improvise to survive. He jammed wet socks into his armpits, using his own body heat and breath to dry them out. When his pack ripped open, he stitched it up with a knife, some thread, and his teeth. He meditated to slow his pulse. He forced his breathing to steady. He slipped into a trance state just to keep the panic from taking over. By the fourth day, his toes were turning blue. He rubbed them frantically with cream, the fear of frostbite gnawing at him. He had to sleep upside down in a snow tunnel, elbows locked out, ready to shove away the snow that kept burying him alive. His pantry was empty, 2 soups, 5 slices of cheese, and a scrap of dried meat, 4 batteries. That was all that stood between him and silence. On August 7th, a voice cracked over the radio. 5 nights in this ice tomb is too much. If the sky doesn't clear, I can't hold on. You can feel the weight of it, the isolation, the terror of knowing the clock is ticking and you're all alone. But the cavalry was coming. The Pakistani army had a play, a suicide mission, maybe, but a play. For days after the distress call, the mountain had been locked down by the storm. 0 visibility, heavy snow, no way in. Then, on August 9th, the clouds broke. The army scrambled 2 Llama helicopters to the zone. These French machines were beasts, designed specifically for the thin air of the high peaks. But even for them, hovering at 19,000 feet was pushing the laws of physics. The crews gutted the choppers, ripping out seats and panels to save every ounce of weight. They launched the first sortie on August 9th, but the mountain fought back with a wall of fog. Humar could hear the rotors thumping in the distance, but all he saw was white. The pilots got close enough to mark his spot and confirmed a rescue was theoretically possible if everything went perfect. 1 slip, and the mountain claims everyone. Morning, August 10th. The weather was still messy, clouds clinging to the face. Lieutenant Colonel Begg and Major Rana looked at each other and made the call. We go now. By 5:45 a.m., they had closed the distance, spotting Humar clinging for his life to that razor-thin ridge of snow. What followed was a masterclass in aviation, easily some of the wildest flying I have ever heard of. The pilots drifted in sideways, holding a steady hover with Humar sitting right at their 9 o'clock. And this is where the math gets scary. You have to watch the torque gauge, the instrument that tells you exactly how much muscle the engine is using. Down at sea level, you are cruising at maybe 60 or 70% power to hold a hover. But up here at 19,000 feet, in air that thin, the needle was screaming at 98%. They were redlining the engine, using every ounce of horsepower just to fight gravity. Their margin for error was gone. They had just enough surplus lift to carry maybe 150 pounds, basically the weight of a heavy backpack. The spinning rotors were slicing the air just inches from the granite wall. 1 rogue gust of wind, 1 twitch from the pilot, and those blades would shatter against the mountain, killing everyone instantly. They swung a knotted rope with a makeshift sling out toward Humar. He reached out, desperate, and snagged it. Just one problem. In the panic and exhaustion, Humar forgot the golden rule. He never unclipped his safety line from the ice screw buried in the wall. The chopper began to pull up, but he was still bolted to the mountain. The rope snapped taut, creating a deadly tug-of-war between the machine and the rock. The helicopter jerked violently sideways, yanked straight toward the death zone. The pilots wrestled with the sticks, fighting for control. The blades blurred dangerously close to the cliff face. In that heart-stopping second, the crew at base camp watched in horror, convinced they were witnessing a crash in slow motion. Then snap, the ice screw ripped out of the wall. The machine lurched free, swinging back from the precipice. Begg's hands were steady, keeping them airborne. And for the next 10 agonizing minutes, Tomaž Humar dangled like a pendulum as they descended to base camp. When his boots finally touched the ground, the medical team swarmed him, frostnip on the extremities, totally drained, barely standing. He was starving, having not eaten in days, but he was breathing. No broken bones, no life-threatening trauma. Well, physically anyway. Back in Slovenia, the whole country threw a party. The Pakistani pilots were hailed as heroes, receiving Slovenia's highest military decoration for their nerves of steel. The public loved Humar so much they wanted him to run for president, and honestly, he probably would have won in a landslide. Even the legendary Reinhold Messner stepped up, calling Humar one of the toughest, most capable mountaineers in the game. To the public, it was a miracle. But inside the climbing world, the mood was different. A lot of the elite crowd looked at that rescue and saw everything that was wrong with modern alpinism. One famous American climber didn't mince words, basically saying, "Great, now every amateur with big dreams and 0 skills can just radio for the cavalry when things get hard." Others went further. labeling Humar a fraud, a publicity hound, rather than a serious climber making smart choices. The ultimate burn came a month later when Steve House and Vince Anderson tackled the Rupel face. They did it fast, light, and completely on their own terms. No cameras, no blog posts, no drama, just a clean, silent ascent that made Humar's media circus look embarrassing by comparison. That silence was loud, and the criticism cut deep. It changed him. Humar didn't stop chasing the edge. He just stopped inviting an audience. In 2007, he pulled off the first ever solo climb of the south face of Annapurna, a suicide mission by most standards. But this time, he didn't tell a soul. The world was deaf to his movements until that final, desperate call from the heights. There were no press releases, no flashing website banners, no parades. He had absorbed the backlash from his past, but he learned the wrong lesson. He wasn't prioritizing safety. He was prioritizing silence. November 2009, Tomaž Humar slips into Nepal like a phantom. Sticking to his new mantra, he was a ghost on the mountain. Hardly a soul knew he had boots on the ground. His target was the south face of Langtang Lirung, a notorious widowmaker in the region. And he was tackling it completely alone. No rope partner, no Sherpa support team, just Humar versus the ice. Now, Langtang Lirung might not be a name you recognize. It certainly isn't Everest. At 23,711 feet, it doesn't even crack the top 50 highest peaks. But don't let the altitude fool you. Here is the deadly reality. 51 expeditions have tried to tame it. Only 14 succeeded. You are looking at a 27% survival rate. 16 climbers lost their lives there, 13 of them buried under crushing avalanches. And that south face Humar was eyeing. Nobody had managed to climb it since 1995. Humar's strategy was stripped down and raw. He would go alpine style, fast and light with barely any gear, bivouac on the fly, tag the summit, and descend, proving he was still the king of the mountains without the media circus that turned Nanga Parbat into a reality show. So, on November 5th, 2009, he walked out of base camp and into the void. Back at camp, the only soul left was his cook, Jagat, sitting by the radio, waiting for a signal. For 2 days, Humar ground his way upward. By November 7th, he hit 20,000 feet and carved out a sleeping ledge on a ridge. The script was playing out perfectly. He was moving fast. The technical sections were brutal but passable, and the weather was cooperating for the moment. And then came November 9th. At roughly 20,700 feet, Humar made a choice. He keyed the radio to Jagat, and the message was chillingly brief. I am here. It is not possible. I go down. He was bailing. He read the mountain, saw the weather turning, and felt the odds stacking up against him. It was the smart play, the exact same instinct that saved his life on Dhaulagiri in '99 when thoughts of his son made him turn back. He was coming home, but gravity doesn't care about good intentions. I can't pinpoint the exact second the disaster struck. All we know is that when the radio crackled again later that afternoon, the voice on the other end made Jagat's blood freeze. Jagat, I had an accident. His leg was snapped, his back shattered, his ribs crushed. He must have slipped on a patch of black ice or missed a foothold during the down climb. The mountain only needed one mistake. Stuck at 20,700 feet on a face untouched for 14 years. Those injuries were a death sentence. Humar was staring down a fate he had miraculously dodged since 2005. This time, the cavalry wasn't coming. No diplomatic crisis, no president's barking orders, no 56 million people watching a live stream, just a broken man, alone in the cold, fading away. You have to wonder what went through his mind as the silence finally closed in. Do you think his mind drifted back to the rescue choppers on Nanga Parbat? Did he see his children's faces? Or did he finally accept that the mountain, this living thing he worshipped, didn't love him back? Against all logic, Humar survived the night, November 10th, dawn. He scraped together the last of his strength for one radio call to Jagat. His voice was a ghost. Jagat had to press the receiver hard against his ear just to hear the static. Humar managed a handful of broken words before the signal faded. Jagat, this is my last. Click. Silence. Tomaž Humar never spoke again. For 4 days, the rescue team lived in hell. November 10th, a chopper swept the south face. Nothing. The clouds were too thick. Visibility was zero. A team of Sherpas mobilized instantly, moving at superhuman speeds. fixing ropes 1,600 feet up toward Humar's last coordinates. But the mountain was empty. November 12th and 13th, the weather slammed the door shut. Heavy snow, massive avalanche risk. Air Zermatt flew a specialist team into Kathmandu, but even the best in the world could only wait and pray for blue skies. November 14th, the weather broke. 3 hours of scanning the ice from the air, and then they saw it, but it didn't make any sense. His body was at 18,400 feet. That's 2,300 feet lower than his last call, and way off to the left. He was frozen solid. Even from the chopper, you could see the leg was broken. How did he get all the way down there? Did he really drag a broken body down the mountain for 4 days, desperate to reach an altitude where the choppers could fly? Can you even fathom that kind of willpower? The absolute agony, inch by inch, down a vertical wall of ice, bones grinding together, dying but refusing to stop moving. Looking at that steep, rocky terrain, it seems impossible. But remember, this is the man who walked again after doctors told him to buy a wheelchair. Or maybe he fell again, maybe right after that last call, weak, freezing, slipping from the face and tumbling down until the snow caught him 2,000 feet below. But if he fell, why was his suit untouched? Why was his gear perfect? A fall like that would have shredded everything. We'll never know the truth. But we have his camera. They found his last photos, and they are absolutely heartbreaking. One shot looking up the steep couloir, one shot looking down, up to the summit he wanted, down to the base camp he'd never see. Even at the bitter end, Humar was calculating, looking both ways, making a choice. And given where they found him, he chose down. He chose survival. He was trying to get home. But this time, the mountain just wouldn't let him go. I think about the guy who survived the war in Kosovo, the climber who watched his best friend die, then hallucinated his own way down the mountain alone, the man who fell onto concrete, shattered his legs, and forced them to heal through sheer mental grit. The survivor trapped at 19,000 feet for 6 days, saved by a miracle. I think every time he cheated death, it just convinced him, consciously or not, that he was invincible. He truly believed these peaks had spirits. And more importantly, he believed those spirits were on his side, that he could keep rolling the dice against nature because the universe would never let him lose. But there is a razor-thin edge between grit and obsession, between being brave and being suicidal, between respecting the limit and pretending it isn't there. Looking at Humar, you have to ask yourself, does cheating death actually save your life? Or does it just pause the clock? It tricks you into feeling like a god right until the moment time runs out. Tomaž took his final breath in the only sanctuary where the nightmares of Kosovo finally went quiet. It is a tragedy, absolutely. But beneath the ice and snow, it is a story that feels painfully human. Just a man trying to outrun his ghosts at the top of the world. In the end,